version is more accurate. And after each Toshma, we rejected the evidence, and we basically said, lack of evidence, we threw out the case. Okay? That's what we did 3 times with 3 different Toshmas. Now, as you're going to see, the Gemara is going to go on to a completely different area of thought. Mendel. I'm very happy if I speak. I'm also happy if you speak, but I'm not happy if we both speak at the same time.
I'm just so excited that I got a second chance.
Well, if you're going to have a second chance, you better take it and get into Zal and start learning instead of disturbing me in the kitchen over here. All right?
If you only yeshiva where you shout Mendel, and like only one person answers.
No, because there's Mendel, there's Mendi, there's Menachem.
Mem squared here.
We have Menachem and Mendel. Menachem and Mendel, 2 different people.
But the same person.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we have more Davids in here than we do have Mendels over here. Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, back to what I was saying. We had 3 Toshmas to try to resolve this issue. Each and every one of them failed on, how should I say it? It failed, not tremendously. Some of them actually failed very minimally. But the Gemara basically reorganized the Mishnah and said maybe there's an opinion that we don't know about, and that's that. The Gemara seems to be moving on. Now, in the past, when the Gemara moves on, everybody's like, well, what do we resolve? The answer is we didn't resolve anything, right? Now, if we don't resolve anything, that means that as of now, the Gemara is not sure what the Mishnah means, even though it's going further. Now, sometimes it goes further and it leaves it in a doubt. In our case, our Gemara is a very peculiar piece of Gemara. We will pivot back. We will pivot back to this concept of le'itin le'yachzer tanan oy lishois tanan. All right? Good. However, it is important to know we're kind of getting sidetracked and we're starting Iboilahu. Iboilahu, we had this as a keyword before. Iboilahu, what does Iboilahu mean as a keyword? Blah, blah, blah. Let's ask somebody else because you know everything.
No.
You should know everything. You're a tremendously awesome student. All right? Iboilahu. What does Iboilahu mean as a keyword? Iboilahu. Huh?
Raise the question.
Very good. Raise the question. What else do we know with the Iboilahu? No. Sorry. That's Mesve. Iboilahu is a query, which means it's a question that we just simply don't know. Meaning we don't have a proof. It's not challenging a previous person's statement. It's simply opening up a new discussion, and very often Iboilahu is literally the initiation of a brand new discussion. In this case, it may seem that way, although it is kind of in the middle of a discussion because we left open, we're not sure if lo yitin lo yachzir tanan or lo lishes tanan.
How can they start a new discussion without resolving the previous?
Because not everything is resolvable, and I think I've preached about this. But because we have a new student, Michael, I don't mind preaching again, even though I preached to you again about this thing. One of the massive flaws in secular academic thinking, scientific thinking, is that scientists feel that because they are the smartest people that ever exist on planet Earth for all eternity, no one in the past ever was superior to them. Therefore, they come up with the best possible answer, and they stick with it until proven otherwise. Right? Now, that is a tremendous flaw, because what that does is it basically locks the scientific community into sometimes a flawed way of thinking, and it's very hard to get out of a flawed way of thinking, right? Once you're in it. And that's why there's actually a saying in the science world that if you want to have a real breakthrough, you have to wait till the entire generation of scientists dies. Wow. Because as long as the previous generation existed and they built their entire lives on flawed logic, The new generation that realizes it's flawed cannot implement their ideas until the other people die, because the other people they hold the authority, they are the superiors, etc. In the Gemara is not afraid to conclude that it's inconclusive. Okay, and this is actually a tremendously different approach to Talmudic logic versus secular logic. In secular logic, it's almost like there is no one and nothing else. There is no truth beyond us, and therefore the best conclusion we could come up with is the best truth that's out there, right? Whereas the Talmud says, no, there's a creator of the world, and that creator of the world's smarter than me, and he's smarter than you, and he's more complex, and sometimes he allows us to figure him out, and sometimes he doesn't. And therefore, there are times where we have conclusive evidence, and therefore we conclude something. And there's times where we leave it inconclusively. Yeah, we don't know. It's the acceptance of, it's the vulnerability that very often scientists are afraid to admit their vulnerability to a higher reality, because they, of course, don't believe in that higher reality, at least some of them. And that's why science has this flaw where very often they'll accept a flawed logic because they say there is no better logic to accept. Whereas the Talmud says if we cannot prove it, we're just going to say we can't prove it. It's unresolvable. We resolve that it's unresolved. Now, in the Talmud, very often it'll just continue on the discussion with it unresolved, and that means it's unresolved, right? In our particular case, we will pivot back to it after going into a different discussion. And the reason why we pivot back to it after going into a different discussion, because in fact, some of the ideas that we're going to bring up in the next discussion are going to help us build the evidence to one side or the other. All right? Moshe Chaim Leib. There you go. Baruch Hashem. We have a query, we have a question. Again, it's not a challenge. It's not part of the previous conversation. It's kind of the new conversation completely. Where there is a question, Mahu lismaich bo. Are you allowed to put it next to the kira? Up until now, we spoke about on top of the kira. We even mentioned a little bit about inside the kira, right? But we didn't say what about on the side of the kira. Now, for you Talmudic students, you probably know this automatically. For those of you who haven't yet mastered the Talmudic way of thinking, you must realize that this is automatically talking about wherever in the past it would have been prohibited. The question is it permitted in this case? So we're not revisiting every single case. We're only visiting the cases where it would be prohibited. So in a case where it would be prohibited to leave it on top, could you put it on the side? Right? Now the side still, if the side of a kira is probably still pretty hot, it could maintain significant heat. Right? So when the rabbi said you cannot do it unless it's grufa ketuma, were they only talking about on top of the kira, or perhaps even on the side of the kira was included in that prohibition? Okay, so we don't know. Now, the reason why I'm leaving it very open is because we still have an open conversation. We're not exactly sure what rules are which. Okay? According to everybody, there was a time where the rabbis said that if you did not grow grufa ketuma, it would be prohibited to put it on top of the kira. Depends. Depends which version. One of the versions is talking on Shabbos. One of the versions is talking not on Shabbos. Okay, so our question is essentially wherever, however it is prohibited to put it on the top, would it be permitted to put on the side? Is the side the same rule as the top, or is the side have its own separate rule independent of the other one? Yeah? Oh, do we make it? Do we make it to YouTube? We are on YouTube. Good. We have to be there. Good. Where are we? Are you allowed to put it on the side? To put it inside or on top would be prohibited. But to put it next to it, shapir would be allowed, would be good. Or perhaps perhaps there is no difference. So we ask a simple halachic issue: is the side of a kira the exact same rule as the top of the kira, or does it have a separate rule? Okay, that is an inquiry. Now that sounds like a completely independent inquiry to the previous inquiry, which it is completely independent to the previous inquiry. And however, we're going to try to figure this out, and through figuring this out, it might help us figure out the previous inquiry as well. So what do we go to? How do we try to figure this out? We say Toshma Yosef. Yeah, that's what it means. What does it tell you as a keyword? Where what? All right, you're doing something with a quote. That's the only thing you said accurate so far. Something with a quote. Yeah. What are you trying to do with the quote?
So,
Huh? Yosef could probably tell us.
Toshma, what do we learn from the Mishnah?
So come and listen, which means we're going to bring a quote, but we said in the past it's not necessarily Tanei quote. No.
Bringing a quote to resolve an issue.
Oh, we have a brilliant Jew over here. Baruch Hashem. We're bringing a quote to try and resolve an issue that we have. Now, what is the issue that we have?
About the cure.
What about it?
Well, is it putting on it during Shabbos or before Shabbos? Are you allowed to put it on? I'm not sure.
No, that was the previous dilemma. What's the current dilemma? No, what is it? Huh? Am I talking only to the people online or the people over here listening too? Huh? Sometimes I wonder that. I think like the only people listening to me are the people online that I don't know who they are. It's easier because the guy that I see here sometimes they don't seem to be listening. So the guys that are online, I hope I can at least dream and fantasize, because if they weren't listening to me, they would just shut it off. It was very easy. So the fact that they're there, some of them are listening. Shmuel.
If you want to.
Anyways, again, Tashma is trying to resolve an issue. The current issue that we're dealing with is very simple. We need to know whether the side of the kira is the same rule as the top of the kira. That's what we need to know.
Side of the kira?
The side next to the kira.
Why would that be the same rule as on top of it? It's obviously not hot.
Exactly. But is it hot?
Look,
Is it hot? Yes. So how do you determine that it's not the same rule? Maybe it's the same rule, even though it's less hot, but maybe it is the same rule. Maybe it isn't.
It's not the same, but it's still hot.
Oh, obviously it's not the same because that's why we're asking. Because there is a havamina, which means there is a reasonable argument to suggest that it is, and there's a reasonable argument to suggest that it's not.
Well, within a certain spectrum of it's the same up until here.
Yeah, but does it fit into the spectrum or doesn't it fit into the spectrum?
Both of them are critical heat.
Both
Something warm.
correct.
But only one of them is hot enough to make it cook.
How do you know that?
Well, because the one.
No, how do you know only one of them is hot enough to make it cook? Who told you that? You made it up. Yeah, well, don't make things up. The Talmud is not trying to make things up. We're trying to figure things out. Big difference. All right, that's one of the things. By the way, one of my biggest issues when I have Westerners, which is most of my class, people from the English Anglo Western culture coming to my class, I have a very hard time with them because in the West they believe in these theories that everybody gets to make up whatever they want and it's true, right? The problem is that that's not what the Talmud does. The Talmud is not trying to make things up; it's trying to figure things out. Big difference, right? Do you want to make up reality? You could try. It's not going to work, but you can't make up reality. You either you ever figure it out correctly or you figure it out incorrectly, or you just guess and then you're likely to be incorrect anyways, because usually just guesses are wrong. In other words, we know that it's hot. We don't know, is its heat sufficient enough to make it an issue or not? That's a question. We don't know. And that's the question that we had in the beginning of the Gemara. For those who were listening, that is the question of the Gemara. The answer, the Gemara is going to attempt to answer it with a Toshma, which is with a quote. Okay, whenever you see a Toshma, Michael, a Toshma, we're going to tell you, we only tell you once, and then we're going to ask you next time, like this guy. It is a quote. What else? But what is a quote to do what? To attempt and resolve the issue at hand. Okay, it's a quote that will attempt to resolve the issue at hand. Issue at hand is next to it the same rule as on top of it or not? That's the issue at hand. Okay. Now the question is it an identical halacha or is it a different halacha? Yes. Sorry. Ooh, that's hot.
Kira.
What the heck is this thing?
French press.
It looks like when you have the kids you do things around and it's you have the water thing, you shake it and it sprinkles around. That's what it looks like. Huh? Huh? No, it's not all. You see, that's you're saying it isn't all. Most of it is actually gets caught by the filter. Some of it leaks through. Right? And that's what it makes the whole. That's what it makes the whole effect when it's like, Anyways, yeah.
Two things. One is Rabbi Levin used to say, "Learning starts where guessing stops."
Oh, learning starts where guessing stops. Good.
Second, what is Shafir Dameh?
Shapir literally means like it's good, it's okay. Dummy is kind of it is. Shapir dummy, it is. Dummy could also dummy.
It is okay. It's like a question. Is it okay?
Well, in this case, it is. There's a question mark after that. It could be. It actually shapir dummy could be a statement. You have to really look at the construct of the sentence to figure out whether it's a statement or whether it is a question. Okay.
It is okay, or perhaps.
Yeah, so you have or perhaps. So obviously, if you have or perhaps, which means the previous thing is a question and not a statement. Meaning from the context, you have to say it. All right? Toshma, come and listen. We're going to bring a quote that will attempt to resolve the said issue, as I've been saying. Shtei kiras hamas imes, two kiras, the third wide line. Two kiras that are right next to each other. Achas grufo ketuma, one is grufo ketuma. Achas she'ena grufo ketuma, and one is not grufo ketuma. Mashin al gabe grufo ketuma, you are allowed to put or leave on top of the grufo ketuma the afal gav the kosalik lehavla meidach. And this is actually a Talmudic statement, v'afal gav, because that is an it is a Aramaic, it is an Aramaic word. Afal Gav is an Aramaic word, so that's where it switched to the Amoraic sages, right? And the Amoraic sages are explaining. We had this earlier. If you have two kiras, one next to each other, right? We have two kiras right next to each other. And we said you're allowed to leave on one. We said one of them is Grufa Ketuma, and the one next to it's not Grufa Ketuma. It says you're allowed to leave on the one that is, but you're not allowed to leave on the one that isn't. But hold on a second. The one that is Grufa Ketuma is right next to one that isn't Grufa Ketuma. So that should seem to indicate that you are allowed to leave it on the side of a Grufa Ketuma, because if you're not allowed to leave it on the side of the Grufa Ketuma, you wouldn't be allowed to leave it on the one that is Grufa Ketuma, because the one that is Grufa Ketuma is right next to the one that isn't.
That's amazing. You're able to keep that train of thought all the way through the computation.
Were you able to understand that train of thought all the way through the computation?
No, but I was able.
I don't even know what computation means, but it sounds like a cool word. Yeah.
We get a flow chart, figure it out.
If you have two kiras right next to each other,
You mean one with the wall in between?
correct.
Okay.
By definition, one of them is next to the other one.
Well, it's one period separated.
Right? So the one that is, you have two kiras, kira A, kira B, they're attached with one wall. Okay? Kira A is next to kira B, and kira B is next to kira A. So if I tell you that if one is Grufa Ketuma and then one isn't Grufa Ketuma, then you're allowed to leave on the one that is Grufa Ketuma, but not on the one that isn't, right? That clearly indicates that you should be allowed to leave it next to one that is that's not Grufa Ketuma. because A, even though A is Grufa Ketuma, but it's right next to one that isn't. And so that should prove that it would be okay to leave it next to the one that isn't.
Why? I mean, that's big guessing, right? You're
I'm
making
not guessing, it is. Again, A is next to B.
Sweep the coals away.
So if I tell you you could leave on A, means you could leave next to B.
So A is Grufa Ketuma and B is
Let me ask you, A, let's put it this guy's a maybe more mathematical guy. Okay, A equals next to B.
Yeah, I was following.
Okay, you understand that? Do you understand what I just said? A equals next to B.
Go back to where we were before. Get it.
Do you understand? A equals next to B. They're right next to each other, right? A equals next to B. If I tell you could leave it on A, means you could leave it next to B, because A is next to B,
Okay.
right?
Yeah,
So that seems to prove that.
B is the reference point.
Again, we said that if you have A and B and they're right next to each other, you could leave on A because it was Grufu Ketuma, but you're not allowed to leave it on B because it was not Grufu Ketuma.
Okay.
So the Gemara says this proves that you're allowed to leave it next to B because A equals next to B.
Okay.
And therefore, it seems to prove that you're allowed to leave next to a kira that's not even Grufa Ketuma. Now, Michael is asking what is Grufa Ketuma, and for that, because of something that we learned previously in a previous week, where unfortunately you came 1 week too late to learn, 2 weeks too late to learn that. But in today is Pesach Sheni, where what it was we say Pesach Sheni is never too late, right?
No,
so you're not too late. You're late, but not too late. Right. So who's going to explain to Rabbi Michael what is Grufa Ketuma? I think our friend Yaakov here is really interested.
Grufa.
What's Grufa Ketuma?
You either break the coals or you cover them with ash.
We're talking about either leaving food. All right.
So Rabbi, the Gemara is equating putting on top of the one that's Grufa Ketuma as the same as putting it on the side of the one that's not Grufa Ketuma.
Correct.
Correct, because the one that is Grufa Ketuma by definition is next to the one that isn't.
No, the Gemara is saying you're putting it on the one that is.
You actually got it. Okay.
It is by definition. I'm just telling you, they're next to each other.
They're next to, but one is sitting on top of the one that's Grufa Ketuma, one's on the side, and one's not Grufa Ketuma, and that's not necessarily.
Let me ask you a question. You are some sort of doctor or something, right? They taught you a little bit of science. Okay, which direction does heat go? Up. Okay, so if it's higher, it's actually more of a reason to make a problem than it's on the bottom. Yeah.
Gemara tells us that we know.
No, so that's exactly what the Gemara is arguing. The Gemara is arguing that the very fact that it says you're allowed to leave it next to B, because A equals next to B, so that proves you're allowed to leave it next to B. It's pretty straightforward. Anyways, so let me explain to Michal briefly to give him a bit of an update so he knows what's flying. We're talking about either leaving food from Friday to Shabbos or leaving food or taking food off and putting it back on Shabbos. There's different opinions, there's different options, etc. But essentially, there is in certain situations there's a requirement that if you want to do any of the above actions, you must rake the coals. Some people say rake it completely out. Some people say rake it to the sides. Or sprinkle the coals with ashes. I'm not sure. In America, it's actually more common that people use their gas stoves on Shabbos and they put like a metal thing on top. You ever seen that? Right here in Israel, we just got really fancy. We just plug one into the wall and that's that. Yeah. Whatever it is.
Israel situation is better. That electric thing is set on a perfect temperature.
Perfect. Not all of them, but some of them. Yeah. You get the right one.
Almost none of them, actually. I would say.
Yeah. Most of them are super cheap and they'll either burn your food or yeah. Anyways, the point is that this Gemara is the basis for that whole concept. I'll speak to you a little bit maybe after class, give you a better rundown. But right now, our Gemara today started with asking, is the rule of the side of the kira the same as on the top? Now, just so you know what a kira is a rectangular element, which looks a little bit like the Israeli barbecues. Have you seen Israeli barbecues?
The
cheap ones.
like these rectangular little metal things that you put. Yeah, very good. So Akira was a bit similar to that. It was probably made out of clay, and that was their stove. They used to put various different flammables inside, and then they used to put the pot on top, etc. So our Gemara is asking, would this rule of requiring grufa ketuma, would this apply also to putting it on the side of the kira, meaning not on top, but on the side of the kira, or not? And this particular Tashma, the quote that we quoted, seems to prove that you are in fact allowed to leave it on the side because it lets you do it, right? Huh?
If it's
On the opposite, no, on the opposite. This Tashma seems to say that leaving next to a non-grufa ketuma is fine. Leaving it next to a non-grufa ketuma is fine. That's what it seems to prove. Yeah. Okay. So the Gemara rejects this analysis and rejects this way of thinking, and it says as follows: Dilma, perhaps Shani Hossam, over there, it is different regarding that quote that you quoted us. It's different. Why? Kivan de medallia shalit ba avira. Since it's on top of it, its heat is what really controls it. Now, this is actually, yeah, Shani. Shani is different. Yeah. Shani Hossam over there, it's different. What? What's so funny? I didn't say a joke.
It's not a joke.
See, if I say a joke and you laugh, so then I feel good about myself. If I don't say a joke and you laugh, then I'm like, the guy's laughing. Yeah. We are on the line that starts Havla. So again, the Gemara rejects this analysis, rejects this suggestion. The Gemara rejects this analysis and says no. Perhaps the reason why they allowed you to put it on the one that isn't Grufa Ketuma, even though it's next to the one that is because the heat of the Grufa, the heat of the one that it's on top of is really what controls it. Now, what exactly does that mean? Yeah? What should I say one more time? I don't know if I remember it. The Gemara basically says that perhaps this case of two next to each other is different than if there's only one and you're putting it next to there. Because when you're putting one next to a kira that's not Gufa Ketuma, the only heat that this pot is going to get is directly from that kira. However, if you have it on top of one that is Grufa Ketuma, the real strength of the heat is from the one that's Grufa Ketuma. The one that isn't Grufa Ketuma, even though it may seem to be contributing a little bit of heat, but it's not its main force of heat.
It's too far away.
Yeah. Not that it's too far away. I want you to understand. No, they're right next to each other.
But this might help. There's two kinds of kiras we're being discussed.
Let me explain to you. It's very interesting because I'm looking at Rashi, and Rashi and Tosfos both don't seem to elaborate too much on this, but I will for the sake of your intellectual understanding. The entire reason for requiring Grufa Ketuma is why? Why do we require Grufa Ketuma?
Reduce the heat.
Because you might come to stir the coals. You're used to taking a little stick and poking the coals every time. If you look at your pot and you're like, this is not going quick enough, you poke at the coals to try to get it flamed up. Now, if you have one kira, which is not Grufa Ketuma, and you have a pot right next to it, its entire heat is coming from the Grufa Ketuma. Is coming from the non-Grufa Ketuma. Therefore, if you want to heat up the pot, what are you going to do? You're going to say, I got to stir the coals inside the kira because that's where its heat's coming from. But if I have it on top of a pot that's grufa ketuma, what am I going to do when I want to make the pot hotter? What am I going to do? Where am I going to look? I'm going to look into the grufa ketuma one, right? And by the way, we're not talking. Again, you're correct. When you're dealing with a grufa, when you're dealing with a pot, right? Where are you going to go to try and stir the coals? Now, I want to remind you, we're not talking about somebody who is a rebellious shmendrik that wants to break Shabbos. Because you know what? If the guy was such a shmendrik to break Shabbos, he wouldn't listen to us anyways. We're talking about a person that wants to keep Shabbos. The whole purpose of Grufa Ketuma is a strong reminder that it's Shabbos. Just like many people put these little things on their lights so that they shouldn't turn on their lights. The Grufa Ketuma is really there as a reminder that you're not allowed to do it. Now, if you have your pot on top of a kira and you want to stir the coals, which kira are you going to look into? The one that it's on top of or the one that it's next to? The one that it's on top of. And when you look in there, you're like, oh, it's Grufa Ketuma, I can't touch it. However, if there is no kira, if you have a kira that's not grufu ketuma, and you have a pot next to it, and there's no other kira, if you want to heat up that pot, what are you going to do? You're going to look at the kira, which isn't grufu ketuma. And then you might stir the pot. And that's essentially what the Gemara is trying to say, that's when he's trying to reject the suggestion that this Tanaic quote, resolved our issue. Again, let's remind us that the issue is next to it the same rule as on top of it? We tried to prove it by the Mishnah, by the quote, the Tanaic quote, that if two kiras are next to each other, you're allowed to leave it on the one that is grufa ketuma, even though it's next to one that's not. So we tried to use that as proof that you are in fact allowed to leave it next to a kira that is not grufa keduma, and the Gemara is saying no, perhaps that case is different because a person knows that the main heat that pot is going to get is from its own kira. Where's he going to look when he wants to heat up his pot? He's going to look in the one that it's on top of, and that's grufa ketuma, and that's going to stop him. But if there's no other grufa ketuma and it's just next to one that isn't grufa ketuma, then when he wants to heat up that pot, where's he looking? At the kira that's not grufa ketuma, and then he might stir it. So that's how the Gemara rejects the possibility. It doesn't prove the other possibility. It just rejects this as evidence. It says this is insufficient evidence.
Going back to the purpose of the grufa
Yeah.
ketuma, so it's done.
Yeah.
Two reasons, or certainly.
The reason for grufa ketuma is to prevent the person from stoking the coals on Shabbos. That's the reason for grufa ketuma. Right? The philosophy behind it is that when you do grufa ketuma, that's going to prevent the person from doing that. As I said, we're not talking about a rebellious person that's going to deliberately do it. We're talking about a person that's going to inadvertently do it. So the grufa ketuma is there to prevent an inadvertent stoking of the coals. Yeah. Huh?
What is it specifically?
That's a good question. What you're asking is a tremendous question, and the brilliance of that question belongs in the Talmudic mastery class, which unfortunately you haven't made it to yet. We'll get you there. And then in the more advanced class, we could look at Mefarshim and try to understand the actual details. No, it's a good question. It's a brilliant question. What are the actual details? Is it just symbolic? Is it just a symbol? It could be. And by the way, there are opinions that say it's just symbolic, right? Symbolic. The fact that you did something that you don't usually do during the week reminds you that this is Shabbos, right? During the week, you don't have these little plastic things on your lights. Since you don't have those little plastic things on your lights, you come to your light switch and you about to push it and you're like, oh, this plastic thing is only there on Shabbos. So let's deal with that for now, because that's the way we could best understand this Gemara, is that essentially grufa ketuma is somewhat of a symbolism to tell you this is not normal. We don't usually do this in the week. We usually only do this on Shabbos. Now, that is going to remind you that it's Shabbos and therefore I can't do it. And that's the reasoning behind the whole philosophy here, is that once again, if the pot's on top of a kira, and you see that this pot needs to get hotter, the first place you're going to look is in the kira that it's on top of, and therefore you're not going to mix the coals. However, if there is no other kira, then that is the kira that you're going to need to heat up in order to heat up the pot. All right, that's number one. Let's see how well we're doing with time. Not that well. Let's go to the next tashma. We'll go to the next tashma, and I'm gonna do it somewhat briefly, and then we're gonna go for your learning things. Yeah.
Right before the touchdown, can you just translate
Shalit is rules, ba it havla. Havla is like heat in this things. Shalit is like control or control. Ba avira. Its heat is controlled by the one that it's on top of. Toshma, come and listen. We're going to try to resolve this issue because we failed to resolve it before. The Amar Rav Safra, Amar Rav Chia. Rav Safra says in the name of Rav Chia, Kotma means lavta. What happens if you did ketuma? Ketuma is you sprinkled ashes on top of the coals. Same chinla, you can put things next to it, umekaimin oleha, and you could put things on top of it. Noitlin mimena, you're allowed to take it from there, umachzirin law, and you're allowed to put it back. If you look at this quote, also a Tanea quote. No, actually it's not. It's actually an Amorea quote. From here it sounds shmamino lismich nami. From here it seems that to leave it next to it, kotma in. If you did the ketuma, you could do it. Loy kotma loy. Yeah. If you didn't, then you can't. Again, listen carefully. It basically lists that if you did ketuma, you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Well, let's assume that 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, if you didn't do ketuma, should be prohibited. Why else would we say it's permitted if you did ketuma? And by the way, this is a way that the Talmud very often uses its language or understands things. If you say it is permitted in this situation, means it's not permitted in any other situation. This seems to indicate that you are in fact required to do grufa ketuma, even to put it next to it, right? However, the Talmud rejects this reasoning once again and says as follows: Ulatamech, according to your opinion, meaning according to your reasoning, that all 5 of the listings here is required in grufa ketuma. Noitlin mimena, this that it says you're allowed to remove from it the kasani katma in loy katma loy. Would you even think that you're not allowed to remove it from the fire if you didn't do grufa ketuma? Seemingly, the Gemara understands that no one in his wildest dreams would prohibit you from removing it from the fire. Again, leaving it there or putting it back, some people may prohibit you. But to remove it from the fire, why would that be an issue? Right? And so since Noitlin is obviously not included in the prohibition, shows that this statement is not accurate enough to use this as a proof. You understand? Ela tana noitlin mishun machzidin, and so the Gemara says that therefore this statement of taking was because putting it back, right? In order to tell you could put it back, it needed to tell you could take it off, you could put it back. Meaning to take it off was because it was connected to putting it back. Hachanami, so too here too. So it says you're allowed to put next to because you're allowed to put on top of. Meaning just like it used an extra word over there, it used the word extra word over here. Now here the Gemara will reject the rejection. Again, we had the proof, we had the rejection, and now the Gemara is going to reject the rejection. In other words, it's going to requalify the original proof because it rejected the rejection. Hachi hashta. How is this? Asks the Gemara. Hasam over there, over there when it says take it off and put it back, we're talking about the same place, right? You take it off and you put it back in the same place. So it's talking about one place. So it makes sense to say take it off, put it back, because it's one place. However, in our situation, leaving it on the side is one place, putting it on top of it is a different place, and therefore it seems superfluous and not necessary. right? So seemingly the Gemara seems to conclude from here that Seimchen is in fact prohibited even even to leave on the side from this proof. Again, we proved it. We rejected the proof, but then we rejected the rejection, which means the proof is now revalidated, and therefore um, it seems to um, resolve the issue. And let's leave it at that for today. Tomorrow we'll go in. It's interesting that it goes into another tashma. And if it goes into another tashma, it seems like it's not resolved. Why else is it trying to resolve an issue that was just resolved? Good question. We're going to deal with that Bezrat Hashem tomorrow. That will be the end of the Talmudic side of this class. And if anybody has any questions, we're happy to entertain them, etc.
What line are we at? Have to go.
Ah,
Have to go.
you have to go. Let me just see here. I'll tell you which line we got up to. For those of you using my sheets, all right, Seder. Hold on, where are we? Oh, we basically got up to line 51. Yeah, line 51. We got through line 51 on these sheets. Please read them over. Do your work, because I'm actually seeing, I want to commend some people here in the class. They might know who they are. They might not know who they are. But many people in this class I've seen growing tremendously in their Talmudic abilities. And there's only one reason for that, is because they're doing the exercises. They're actually doing the exercises that I spelled out to each and every one of you, except for Michael, because we didn't have a chance to speak about it. But those of you who are and have been completing the exercises that I'm speaking about, you yourselves are realizing that you're advancing in your ability to learn the Gemara. Yeah?
This is the correct one?
Yes. Good? Any other questions? Final questions before we shut the feed? If anybody online wants to ask, again, we're not accepting during the Talmudic any random questions, but if it's something on topic, we may choose to answer it. All you got to do is put it in your comments, and then we see it on the computer, and then we can deal with it. Yeah? Yes. Moshe Chaim Leib. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there is, again, according to every opinion, there is a time where it's going to be a seer. The question is Friday, Shabbos, but that is relative to whichever opinion, which we didn't confirm which opinion is accurate yet. However, we're asking, our question is a general question. Each opinion has some time where Grufa Ketuma is required. The question is does that requirement extend to next to it, or is only on top of it? That's the question. Yeah? Any other questions? Good. Excellent. Sei gesund. We love you all. Have a good day, and we'll see you again.